In this video I'll share with you the recommended temperature for various methods including soldering iron, hot air and preheating tables. We also cover soldering with lead and lead-free alloys. Let's get started. First, let's discuss the melting point of soldered alloys. Leaded solder melts at 190 degrees of Celsius. Fahrenheit is here. While standard industrial lead-free solder melts at an average 210 degrees of Celsius. How to soldering with soldering iron? For leaded solder, optimal temperature of soldering iron tip is 320 degrees of Celsius. This temperature typically used for small SMD components like on this PCB board. Why not 300 degrees of Celsius or 350 degrees of Celsius? The reason is the soldering iron heat capacity. How it works? When you touch your soldering iron to SMD components, the heat from the soldering iron transfers to PCB or SMD component, and if the temperature below the melting point 190 degrees of Celsius, your soldering iron stick to a low. It's very small temperature. The modern soldering station can quickly restore temperature on soldering iron tips for setting temperature 320 degrees of Celsius. The restoring temperature on soldering iron is very important because for comfortable works you need soldering joint by joint by joint without interruption. Higher temperature on soldering iron tip above 350 degrees can cause the tip to burn out faster and lead to carbon buildup. For some big SMD components you can increase the temperature temporarily and then just return it to 320 degrees of Celsius. That's all. For soldering you need to using soldering flux. I use diamond flux, it's very quality flux, I like it. Just remember, if you see the soldering iron tip is burned up, you need to down the temperature. It's very high temperature of your soldering iron tip. Standard time for soldering one joint is 3 seconds, no more. It's a professional soldering joint by joint for maximum 3 seconds for one. When you need to solder some big SMD components with big thermal mass, you need to additional heat. What you need to do? First of all, you can change the soldering iron tip for big. And second method, you can using preheating table. I recommend it every time using the preheating table for additional heating transferring to PCB board. Set up the temperature on preheating table is 200 degrees of Celsius. The gap must be half inch between surface of the preheating table and PCB board. Allow about 1 or 3 minutes for PCB board to absorb the heat. After this time, the temperature approximately 110 degrees on the board without damaging PCB, without damaging components, and you can soldering with standard your soldering iron tip SMD components, big SMD components, very comfortable because the PCB absorb the heat from preheating table. Right now I'm waiting your like on this video and subscribe to my YouTube channel. The second, I look into hot air like this one. When you're using hot air, the temperature depends on using your preheating table or not. Without preheating table, the temperature of hot air must be around 350 degrees of Celsius. And when hot air with 350 degrees of Celsius touches the PCB, on the PCB the temperature around 330. However, if the PCB board have a big components, large components, the heat will dissipate across the PCB and components, making it difficult to reach minimum soldering temperature 190 degrees of Celsius. These methods have risk damaging PCB board, components, plastics. For any complex soldering using preheating table, it's very comfortable, it's very easy for soldering. Preheating ensures the board retains enough heat, allowing hot air to work effectively without causing thermal shock and component damage. Additional method, soldering with soldering paste. If you like to work with soldering paste, you can directly reflow the PCB board on surface of preheating table. Place your PCB board with soldering paste and components on the surface of preheating table and waiting around 30 seconds for melting soldering paste. When you see the fully melted of soldering paste on the PCB board, waiting just 3-5 seconds and remove board from preheating table. And right now about safety. When you're soldering, every time using properly fume extractor, not filter. Take your money and buy properly fume extractor. It's your health. Be sure you like this video and subscribe to my channel. Thank you for watching. In the description of this video you can find links to my Instagram, my Telegram channel with soldering tips and technology tips, and my website with soldering flux, diamond flux. Thank you for watching. Bye bye.